Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 83, The Midwife. A fan of my podcast, Tricia Iazzi, asked me to do an episode on her granny Dunn, who had delivered over 1,000 babies in her small country town of Balranald in southern New South Wales without a single maternal death. I was instantly intrigued, so here is her story. I'm always keen to create episodes on interesting family members you have, so please contact me via my Facebook page, Family History Mysteries, if you have a story that you would like shared. Margaret McCormick was the third child of 11, born to Irish parents Patrick McCormick and Mary Irwin in Oatlands, Tasmania in 1858. Her father Patrick was born in 1805 at Leitrim, Connaught, Ireland. He was convicted of forging banknotes and stealing 30-shilling notes in the Lancaster Assizes on the 20th of March 1819, at the tender age of 14. He was given 14 years transportation for this offence. He was placed in the prison hulk, the Justicia, at Woolwich initially, and then sailed on the Atlas on the 5th of June 1819 to New South Wales. His occupation at the time of conviction was a baker and pastry cook. The convicts on the Atlas disembarked in New South Wales on the 30th of October 1819 and were forwarded to Liverpool for distribution. Patrick was listed as part of the Orphan School Clearing Party on the 26th of October 1824. He initially received his ticket of leave on the 21st of November 1827, but it was cancelled. He did receive it, but not until the 16th of July 1831. He got his certificate of freedom on the 29th of March 1833. Patrick married Mary Irwin at St John's Catholic Church in Richmond, Tasmania on the 12th of May 1855. It is believed that Mary worked as a house servant near Richmond when she met Patrick McCormick. Within 10 months of meeting, they were wed. Patrick stated he was 30, he would have in fact been 40, and Mary stated she was 23, and based on her convict record, she was 21. Patrick was listed as being free by servitude, and Mary listed herself as free. Patrick also listed himself as a widower, and Mary a spinster. Patrick died on the 18th of July 1901 in Balranald, New South Wales. His informant was his daughter Elizabeth. She stated he was 94 when he died. He was in fact 96, and his gravestone says he was 98. And there was a small mention in a newspaper of his death. McCormick, on the 18th at his residence, Balranald, Patrick, the dearly beloved husband of Mary McCormick, aged 94 years. His wife, Mary Irwin, was born in 1834 in Avoca, County Wicklow, Ireland, and she was the second child of 8 to William Irwin, a miner, and Margaret Kinsella Purcell. She immigrated at the age of 20 from Wicklow on the ship the Caroline Middleton that docked in Hobart on the 29th of September 1854. It stated that she could wash, iron and milk and was a domestic servant. By July 1854, Patrick had moved to Tasmania, and once he married Mary, they lived at Prosses Plains in 1856 and in Oatlands in 1857 to 1864. By 1865, they moved to Victoria, where they lived at Heathcote from around 1865 to 1872, which is where Mary's mother had moved to after her immigration in 1864, and also where 3 of Mary's brothers lived. The family settled at Iron Pot Gully, where Patrick found employment on a station. And there was a mention on the 12th of May 1865 in a court case, and Patrick McCormick mentioned that he was a labourer working in Mr. Egan's employ. On the 1st of March 1872, there was a notice. Mary McCormick, aged 40 years, about 5 foot 2 inches in height, a mark on her upper lip, slightly freckled, has deserted her family of 9 children, the youngest being only 18 months old. Anyone who will apprehend her and send word to her husband, the undersigned, and keep her till he arrives, will receive a sum of £2. Patrick McCormack, Heathcote, 27th of February 1872. Mary must have been found and must have returned as they moved further north to Rushworth in Victoria and even further to Balranald, New South Wales, where Patrick was working as a boundary rider. There are at least 550 Australian descendants within the 150 years of the children being born to Patrick and Mary. Mary died on the 21st of January 1912 in Balranald, aged 92. And she died in quite tragic circumstances. An article in the local paper titled "Tragic Fire Claims the Life of Elderly Woman." In a devastating incident that occurred in the early hours of Tuesday morning, a fierce fire engulfed a weatherboard house, resulting in the complete destruction of property and the tragic death of Mrs. Margaret McCormick. Despite brave attempts to rescue Mrs. McCormick, the flames had already engulfed the building, making it impossible to save her. The firefighters quickly deployed their equipment but were met with a distressing setback. The water supply had been cut off. Desperate for assistance, they urgently contacted the waterworks, only to discover that the reservoir had been drained empty. It took nearly an hour before water was finally made available. Helpless bystanders watched in agony as the flames consumed the cottage, fully aware that a fellow human being was being incinerated before their eyes. Within a short period of time, though it felt like an eternity to the onlookers, the cottage was reduced to a smouldering heap of ruins. Tragically, Mrs. McCormick's charred remains were recovered from the wreckage, making identification nearly impossible. The circumstances surrounding Mrs. McCormick's untimely death were even more heartbreaking, as those who had encountered her earlier in the day recalled their conversations with her. She had expressed feeling exceptionally well and full of vitality. Despite her advanced age, Mrs. McCormick was known for energy and activity, and she lived alone in the cottage, frequently visited and cared for by her devoted growing-up family. Unfortunately, nothing was salvaged from the fire. Mrs. McCormick was fondly remembered as a woman with a strong Irish heritage and private indulgence in smoking a clay pipe. The community mourns the loss of this vibrant and spirited individual, and her absence will be deeply felt by all who knew her. So their daughter Margaret McCormick was born in Oatlands, Tasmania on the 24th of October, 1858. Some state that Margaret married John Thomas Dunn in Echuca, Victoria on the 4th of June, 1880, although this is not the case due to John already being married. John had married Emily Gibbs, a Corrupt, Victoria, in February 1877, and they had 2 children, one in 1877 and one in 1879. John left his wife, Emily, around April 1880, and as a result, Emily sued for divorce. Dunn versus Dunn, a wife suing for divorce. An application was made to Sir William Windeyer in divorce this morning for a dissolution of the marriage between Emily Mary Dunn and her husband John Dunn on the ground of desertion and adultery on the part of the husband. Mr. Whitfield appeared for the wife, the petitioner. Emily Mary Dunn, the petitioner, said she was the wife of John Dunn, to whom she was married on the 7th of February 1877. Her husband was a resident of Rushworth, Victoria, and he carried on farming there. She lived with her husband till April 1880, and then he left her. Shortly before he left her, she found a letter addressed to him from Margaret McCormick, who had been a servant in one branch of the family. From this letter, it appeared that the respondent was to meet her in Echuca. They had some words about it, and the respondent threatened to sell the place, telling the petitioner to do as she pleased and to go back to her parents or take a situation. The respondent went away, but used to send her money occasionally, but never asked her to live with him. He did offer to return, but she objected in consequence of something she had heard. She had not seen the respondent since 1880 and had received no money from him since 1883. George Hartwell, the District Court bailiff at Balranald, said he knew the respondent, who had been living near Balranald for some time, rabbiting on Peaka Station. The witness knew Margaret McCormick and knew that the respondent lived with her. They lived as man and wife and had a family of 5 or 6 children. The witness served him with the citation in the present suit, and the respondent, referring to the petitioner, said, "I have treated her very badly. I suppose I will have to marry this one now," meaning Margaret McCormick. The respondent tore up the papers, which were served upon him, and said the petitioner could do her worst. His Honour found that the issues proved and granted a decree nisi the petitioner to have custody of the 2 children. So as mentioned, John Dunn and Margaret McCormick lived as man and wife from about June 1880. John worked at Glen Emu Station north of Balranald, and there are unmarked graves for 5 Dunn children who died at Glen Emu who were all under 2 years old. John left Margaret McCormick in about 1892, the year that their youngest child was born. John married Annie Graham in Balranald on the 10th of November 1897. And his husband, Richard Graham, had died in October 1896. And there was a marriage notice in the paper. Dunn, Graham, on the 10th of November at Sunny Corner, Balranald, by the Reverend R. Johnson Smith, B.A., John Dunn to Annie Maria Graham. Interestingly, Annie Graham was the nurse present at one of the births of Margaret and John's children in 1889. On the 7th of October 1903, John Dunn put some evidence forward in a case, and he stated that he was a labourer residing at Sunny Corner near Balranald. On the 27th of February 1905, there was a case titled Alleged False Statement, Accused Committed for Trial, an unusual case. And this was in the Riverina Recorder, a Balranald and Moolameen paper. At the Court of Petty Sessions on Monday morning, before J.L. Shropshire PM, John Dunn was charged on summons that he did, on the 9th of April 1889 at Glen Emu near Balranald, wilfully make a false statement respecting his marriage, that the said John Dunn was married on the 4th of June 1880 at Echuca, Victoria, to one Margaret McCormick, for the purpose of having the said statement inserted in a register of births kept at Balranald, the facts of the parents of a child being married or unmarried being a particular requirement of law to be registered for the birth of a child. Mr. Robertson appeared for the defendant. Sergeant Looms stated that he had made a search of the records of births, deaths and marriages kept at Balranald. He found the form produced with the information of the birth, number 938, dated the 9th of April 1889, addressed to Norman Lockhart, Esquire, District Registrar Balranald, signed by John Dunn, Glen Emu near Oxley. On the face of that document was written, above the signature of the defendant, a statement that John Dunn was the father of a male child, not christened, born at Glen Emu on the 7th of April 1889, that Margaret McCormick, aged 30 years, a native of Tasmania, was the mother of the child. The document also showed that John Dunn was married to Margaret McCormick on the 4th of April 1888 at Echuca. Dunn stated that the previous issue was number of males living 1, number of females living 3, number of males deceased 0, number of females deceased 1. The form showed that there was no doctor present at the birth of the child and that Annie Graham was the nurse present. The particulars set forth in that form were required to be given to the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages to be inserted in the birth register kept for that purpose. He now produced the certified copy of birth registration number 938 at Balranald, showing that the particulars of the previous exhibit were duly inserted in the register at Balranald. The witness produced the certificate stating that a search had been made in the books of that office for the years 1876 and 1883, but no record could be found of the marriage of John Dunn to Margaret McCormick. The witness also produced a certificate under the seal of the Supreme Court of New South Wales in divorce, dated the 13th of January 1905, in which it was certified that the marriage between Emily Mary Dunn, formerly Emily Mary Gibbs, the petitioner, and John Dunn, respondent, which was solemnised at Corrupt, Victoria on the 7th of February 1877, was on the 19th of April 1893 dissolved by decree of that court. The John Dunn referred to in that certificate was the defendant now before the court. Henry Ernest Phillips, manager of the AJS Bank Balranald, stated that he had about 20 years banking experience and had been manager at Balranald for 4.5 years. He knew the defendant who was a client of the bank, he knew the defendant's signature, and he believed the signature on the document produced was that of the defendant. The writing in the body of the document did not seem to be of the defendant. The signature at the foot of the document in question was like the signature that usually appeared on the defendant's cheques. Margaret McCormick stated that she knew the defendant John Dunn, with whom she first became acquainted about 25 years ago. She was never married to the defendant either at Echuca or any other place. She had a child at Glen Emu. The child was born on the 7th of April 1889 and died before it was named. John Dunn was the father of that child. She did not know whether the birth of that child was registered. She did not register its birth. Mrs. Jim McCormick was present when the child was born. The witness thought a person named Graham was also present. She would not know Dunn's signature if she saw it. She could not remember how long she lived with Dunn, who left her at Balranald about 13 years ago. She did not know of any divorce proceedings in which Dunn had been concerned. She knew the defendant was a married man. She bore 7 children, of which the defendant was the father. In 1889, she had 4 children living. The child that was born in 1889 was buried at Glen Emu. Constable Adams stated that he had served a summons on the defendant. The defendant said, in addition to other remarks, "I suppose I'd better plead guilty. There's nothing else to do." The document he produced was information of birth number 921 in 1890. The witness gave a detailed description of the form produced, and it was signed by John Dunn at Tory Luke. Sergeant Looms said it was very clear to him that Dunn had made a willfully false statement. They had documentary evidence and also the evidence of Margaret McCormick. The defendant was then formally charged and reserved his defence, and he was committed to take his trial at the next circuit court at Hay on the 5th of April 1905. Mr. Robertson applied for bail, and the PM allowed bail in the defendant's own recognisance of £60 and 2 sureties of £30 each, and one of £60. The same accused was similarly charged in respect to a statement signed by him in connection with the registration of the birth of a child on the 4th of May 1890. Evidence of a similar nature to that in the foregoing case was taken, and the conclusion was that the accused was committed to take his trial at the Circuit Court on the 5th of April in Hay. Bail was allowed in similar circumstances to the first case. And on the 8th of March 1905, the Attorney-General has declined to prosecute in the case of J. Dunn, who was recently committed for trial at Balranald on 2 charges of alleged willful false statements concerning the registration of births of 2 of his children. So for John Dunn, it was thrown out of court. John and Annie moved to Merbeen, where John ran an orchard in 1914, and John died at Merbeen in March 1934. After John left Margaret, she became the licensee of the Sunnyside Private Hospital in the home that John and her shared in River Street, Balranald, and Margaret died on the 25th of November 1934 in Balranald. And there was an obituary related to Margaret. Mrs. Margaret Dunn. At 12 noon on Sunday the 25th of November, death removed from our town one of the best known of its citizens in the person of Mrs. Margaret Dunn, and intimately known amongst her large circle of friends and relatives as Granny Dunn. The deceased was an extremely popular lady and enjoyed the respect of every citizen of the town and district. At the ripe old age of 76 years, the late Mrs. Dunn passed away after a long illness, during the latter part of which she was practically confined to her home. Her home, Sunnyside, River Street, Balranald, was where she had resided for many years, following her profession as a nurse, and she conducted a private hospital for 39 years. In the early days, she acted as a guide and a friend to all, and when there was no doctor, performed many skilled feats amongst the sick and the suffering. It had been said that she helped bring into the world over 1,000 children and earned the distinction of never losing a mother. The late Mrs. Dunn was born in Tasmania and came to these parts in early youth. She was a member of the McCormick family, who were well known in the district. The funeral took place at 11 a.m. on Monday morning, leaving the Roman Catholic Church, and a long cortege of vehicles followed the remains to its last resting place. The deceased leaves a large family of children and grandchildren to mourn their sad loss, and the deepest sympathy of the town and district is extended to the bereaved family. And Margaret and John Dunn had 7 children. The first child, Margaret, was born at Glen Emu Station near Balranald, and she died in 1889, aged 6. The second child, Henry, commonly known as Roger, was born at Glen Emu Station in 1884. He married Christina Eastburn at Glen Emu Station on the 26th of February 1908. They had 11 children, and Henry died at Dalton's Bridge near Kahuna, Victoria, on the 5th of October 1953, aged 69. The third child, Elizabeth Mary, known as Bessie, was born at Glen Emu Station in 1887. She died in March 1909, and an article outlining her death. The death occurred at the Balranald Hospital on Saturday morning of Bessie, third daughter of Mr. John Dunn, Balranald. The deceased was only 23 years and 9 months of age, and her death was due to a malignant form of anemia. She was a patient in the Balranald hospitals some little time ago and underwent surgical treatment. She was afterwards attacked by the disease, which culminated in her death. The remains were interred in the Roman Catholic portion of the cemetery on Sunday, the funeral being largely attended. Christina Ann, known as Teen to the family, was born at Glenemus Station on the 28th of June 1888. She married John Lucy in Footscray, Victoria on the 15th of July 1915. They had 3 boys, and Christina died at Vermont, Victoria on the 8th of August 1985, aged 97. On the 7th of April 1889, they had a stillborn son that was unnamed that was referred to in the court case. The 6th child, Elsie Jean Dunn, was born on the 22nd of March 1890 at Glenemus Station, and she died in Windsor, Victoria in 1970, aged 80. John Thomas, known as Jack, was born in 1892 on Glenemus Station. He married Betsy Goodman in Victoria in 1915. They had 3 daughters, and Jack died in Wollongong, New South Wales in 1968, aged 76. Hazel Marion McCormick was born on the 9th of June 1896 at Glenemus Station. Her father was not listed, however she used the name Dunn. She was living with her mother and stated her occupation as a housemaid in the 1935 census. We do know that John Dunn had left Margaret around 1892, which was when she had her son Jack. John Dunn was not the father of Hazel Marion McCormick. Hazel had a child, Lorna Dunn, in 1923. Family trees have her father listed as Jack Murphy. However, no father is listed on the birth record. And Hazel died in Elstonwick, Victoria in 1962 at the age of 66. And Margaret McCormick's siblings, so Patrick McCormick and Mary Irwin's children. Their firstborn was Mary Ann, and she was born on the 3rd of January 1856 at Prosser's Plains, Tasmania. She married William Alfred Goodwin on the 14th of September 1872 in Heathcote when she was 16 and William 24. Mary Ann said she was 21 in order for them to wed without consent. William was a butcher and a sleeper cutter, and they had 16 children. And Mary Ann died in Heathcote, Victoria in 1920 at the age of 64. The second child, Patrick Joseph McCormick, was born in Oatlands, Tasmania on the 19th of June 1857. He remained in Tasmania and then, as an adult, moved over to Victoria and married Mary O'Neill at Axdale, Victoria on the 30th of December 1888. He died on the 27th of July 1929 in Dunwich, Queensland, aged 72, and they had 4 children. The third child, James, was born in Oatlands, Tasmania on the 12th of August 1860. He married Emma McLean at the Christian Bible Parsonage in Echuca, Victoria on the 6th of October 1881, and James listed his occupation as a boundary rider at the time of their marriage. On the 1st of June 1887, in the Clare Police Court, it says Robert Binney, Henry Hobson and James McCormick were charged on the 11th day of April 1887 at Golgol Station, unlawfully and knowingly, by a certain false pretence, they did attempt and endeavoured to obtain of and from one Ernest Edward Hudson, manager of Golgol Station, the sum of 2 shillings, the monies of one John Hunter Patterson, with intent to cheat and defraud. The following evidence was taken. Constable Simpson deposed, "On Wednesday the 18th of May, I apprehended the prisoner, James McCormick, now before the court, by virtue of warrant under the hand and seal of W.B. Gayfer, Esquire, a Justice of the Peace for the Colony of New South Wales, on a charge of false pretence. I read the warrant to the prisoner, who merely answered, 'Yes, it is rather a nasty position for a married man to be in.' For the defence, John Dunn deposed, 'I am a rabbiter at Turley Block. I know all 3 prisoners before the court. I have caught several rats. I skinned 4 or 5 and hung the skins in the shade to dry near the chimney of the hut where the prisoners resided. I had also at that time over 8 rabbit skins which had not been passed by the inspector. My rabbit and rat skins are not now where I left them. I am the brother-in-law to the prisoner, McCormick.' The finding of the bench was that the 3 prisoners stand committed for trial at the Court of Quarter Sessions to be held at Balranald, and bail was allowed for each prisoner of the sum of £40, with sureties of each prisoner in the sum of £20 each. And the above bail was forthcoming on the Monday, shortly after the arrival of the 3 prisoners in Balranald, and they were acquitted. So what this court case was about was that professional rabbiters could be checked by the rabbit inspector, and what had happened was that, interestingly, John Dunn, Margaret McCormick's de facto husband, had placed rat skins amongst the rabbit skins and were caught doing so, and then tried to claim money from the landowner for what the landowner thought was just rabbit skins. So James and Emma had 14 children all up, and he died in Hay on the 20th of November 1946 at the age of 86. The 4th child, Ella McCormick, was born on the 12th of July 1862 at Oatlands, Tasmania, and I was unable to find any further information on her, so it is presumed that she had died in infancy. The 5th child, Sarah, was born on the 25th of September 1864 at Oatlands, Tasmania. She died at only 2 years old on the 19th of August 1866 at Heathcote, Victoria. And I'll just warn you at this point, there's some graphic information on the death of this child. So there was a magisterial inquiry into the death of Sarah McCormick. On Thursday, the 20th of September, Mr. Edwin Field JP held an inquiry into the cause of death of Sarah McCormick, found in the bush on the 18th of September, when the following evidence was taken. Patrick McCormick sworn, I am a shepherd living at Ironpot Creek on Mr. Lenroyd Station. I lost a child on Saturday, August the 18th. It was a female child aged 1 year and 11 months. I was at the house between 3 and 4 o'clock. I saw the child on the day. I then left my hut and went to Heathcote. It was dark when I arrived in Heathcote. I stopped at James Irwin's at Heathcote. I left for home and arrived there in about 2 hours. My wife was not at the house when I arrived. I was told one of my children was lost and that my wife was looking for it. I then went to search myself and found my wife and others looking for the child. I searched the bush and the water holes but could not find the child. The next morning I reported the matter to the police at Tooborac. The child was named Sarah. She was born in Tasmania. I was told the child was found on the 18th. I have seen the child found and recognised the body of my daughter Sarah by the clothes, the boots and the hat it wore. Mary McCormick sworn, I am the wife of Patrick McCormack and live with him at Ironpot Gully. I recollect the 18th of August. I was at home till 4 o'clock that day when I left to go to a neighbour, Mrs. Ashworth's, a distance of 2 miles. I went for some butter and milk, leaving my children at home. I left my 4 children in the hut, the oldest boy 10 years, the second girl 8 years. I left Sarah, the child which was lost, in charge of the eldest boy. She strayed away from them. When they went to look for her, they could not find her. I went at once in search, but did not succeed in finding her. All I had to drink was a glass of ale. I heard a child had been found on Tuesday last. I went to the spot and recognised the body of my lost child by her clothes, boots and hat. Hartley Horsfall Ashworth stated, I am 8 years old. I remember last Tuesday I was out looking for my father's cattle near the old bridge at Wapanintack Creek. I saw Sally McCormack lying dead. I thought it was a black girl, but I knew by her white hair. I knew Sally McCormack when she was alive. I went home directly and told my mother. I went with Mr. Morris and Constable Mansfield and pointed out the spot where Sally McCormack was lying. I do not know the nature of an oath. I know what will become of me if I do not tell the truth. Patrick Mansfield sworn, I am a police constable stationed at Heathcote. I remember the 18th. On that day I received information that the body of the deceased, Sarah McCormack, was found in the Wapanintack Creek. I proceeded there and brought the last witness to the mother of the deceased. I then went to where the body was found. It was pointed out to me by the last witness, Hartley Horsfall Ashworth. I showed it to the mother, who identified the body by the clothes. I had removed the body to the camp at Heathcote where it now is. Charles Robinson sworn, I am a duly qualified medical practitioner residing at Heathcote. I have this day examined the body of a child, apparently 2 years of age. It is an advanced state of decomposition and partially destroyed in consequence of having been fly-blown sometime since. The internal viscera are in a state of decomposition, which renders it impossible to determine whether they are in a deceased state or had been injured during life. The observation applies also to the integuments and fleshy parts of the body. There was no portion of the brain left, it having been consumed by decomposition and maggots. None of the bones examined of the skull or body show any marks of injury from the appearance of the remains. I cannot give an opinion as to the cause of death, which took place at least a month since. It is quite possible that a child of that age was exposed to cold and wet at night while fatigued and would die in a few hours. The effect of the cold would be to produce torpor and lethargy from which it could not rally. The verdict of the inquiry was that the deceased, Sarah McCormick, caused by her death from exposure of wet and cold on the 19th of August. So a tragedy for the family. The sixth child was William, and he was born in 1866 in Heathcote, Victoria. Not a lot is known about William. He never married. He worked on stations in the Balranald area, including Paker and Langley Downs, and he owned a house in Market Street, Balranald. There is a photo of William, and it states Margaret and William McCormick. So I'm assuming that it is his sister Margaret that he has the photo with, unless he was in a de facto marriage. William died on the 23rd of August 1940 in Balranald. The seventh child, John Irwin McCormick, was born on the 20th of February 1867 in Heathcote, Victoria, and he was known in the family to be the wild one. On the 7th of November 1891, John McCormick was charged with drunkenness and he was fined 5 shillings or 24 hours in the lockup, and that was in Deniliquin. He was also recorded as being jailed in Hay, New South Wales in 1892, and at this time he was 24. A year later, on the 21st of February 1893, he was jailed again in Hay and he received hard labour for 6 months for embezzlement. It says John McCormick was charged with embezzling the sum of £39 and 14 shillings, the property of James Hill and another. The accused pleaded guilty. The prosecutor gave the accused a good character, but his only fault was that he took too much drink in at times. The accused had been 4 months waiting his trial, and His Honour sentenced him to 6 months in Hay Jail. An order was made for a sum of £10 found on the prisoner to be returned to Hill. John is described by family members as a wild, drunken, womanising shearer who loved to sing and dance, but would fight at the drop of a hat. And according to family stories, he met a sticky end. He was on his way home after a dance on a bicycle when he was visiting his brother Tom at Lake Kajalico, and he stopped in at a wayside pub and was bashed to death, possibly by an irate husband. However, his death date is unknown. And the eighth child, Thomas Edward McCormick, was born on the 20th of August 1870 in Heathcote, Victoria. At 16, he moved to Lake Jellicoe, where he worked on the construction of a weir that crosses the Lachlan River and diverts water to Lake Jellicoe. He continued in this role until 1902. In 1896, he attracted the attention of Jackie Brewer, a jockey and a trainer who rode Battalion in the Melbourne Cup in 1897. Thomas took a fancy to the horse Lord Baron, that was Jackie Brewer's, and purchased the horse from him. Thomas was a bucket jump rider, and he saddled up Lord Baron and won the Shearer's Handicap at Dead Man's Point. Later the same day, he won again the Flying Handicap, thus completing a double. The horse was later taken to England, where it won the Grand National Steeple. Thomas married Margaret Parler in 1898 in West Wyalong. From 1908 to 1922, he worked as an overseer at Uranaway Station, Hillston. And in 1922, Margaret and Thomas took up an outstation at Gamonia Gap, a property noted for its large woolshed and yards. He remained running that farm for the rest of his life. Thomas was the only member of the family to purchase land and take up farming. He was said to be a fine horseman, quietly spoken and well respected. Thomas and Margaret had 6 children, some of whom stayed in the area. And Thomas died on the 14th of May 1965 at Lake Jellicoe, aged 94. The ninth child, Annie Hamilton McCormack, was born on the 17th of August 1872 at Rushworth, Victoria. She married James Samuel Dunlop Hamilton in Balranald on the 1st of December 1887 when she was only 15. They had 9 children. James was a mariner before jumping ship and arriving in Australia. James died in June 1903 when Annie was only 30 and their youngest child only 1. And a small article stated that James Hamilton died suddenly of heart failure after 6 weeks' residence in the hospital. Annie then went on to marry Stanley Percy Vivian Stevens on the 28th of December 1904 in Balranald. He was known as Viv and had worked for James prior to his death, and Annie had a further 5 children with Viv. Annie died on the 22nd of November 1930 in Balranald, aged 58. And the youngest child of the family, Elizabeth Winifred McCormack, was born in Rushworth on the 20th of March 1873. Elizabeth was the main carer for her ageing parents, and on their passing she worked at the Oxley Hotel, where she met her husband, Herbert Walter Skinner, when she was 39 and he was 24. She married Herbert Skinner at St Augustine's, Yarraville, Victoria, on the 19th of November 1914. She died in Yarra Glen, Victoria on the 24th of July 1915, aged 42, during childbirth of heart failure. Their baby son, Herbert William, also died. And the death record states, Skinner, née McCormack, on the 24th of July 1915, Elizabeth Winifred, beloved wife of Herbert W. Skinner, also their infant son, Herbert William. So the McCormack family definitely had good genes. You would have noticed that a lot of the family members lived well into their 80s and 90s, which was quite unusual for that time. And there are many descendants of this family in the Balranald and surrounding towns today.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.